Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast on review here. And today we're taking a look at Interview with the Vampire Season 1, Episode 1. Let's go on review. Let's go on review.
AMC series Interview with the Vampire Season 1, Episode 1.
Oh, yeah. All right, well, let's get started. So welcome back to the podcast. If you don't know me, I'm your host, Ash, and we'll be going through some of the best and greatest TV shows and everything media for On Review Podcast here. That's what we basically do. Today we're taking a look at basically Interview with a Vampire. You guys are familiar with the show. I'm sure you all are. It's AMC's Interview with the Vampire, because I know back in the day that there was definitely a movie. Yeah, that was what it was. There was definitely a movie for Interview with the Vampire that basically stuck. And I guess this is just the TV version of it. But here's a little breakdown of what the show is, guys. So in episode 1, we meet Louis. Louis meets the vampire Lestat in 1910 in New Orleans. It's basically the synopsis, director and directed by Alan Taylor, written by Roland Jones, Annie Rice, Ben Phillip, and stars Jacob Anderson, Sam Reed, and Eric Bosane. Yeah, so just this first episode, first of all, guys, welcome to the podcast. You know, all my listeners here, I said that before, but I'm saying it again. So anyway, yeah, just discussing the episode, just jumping right into it. I think that right off the cuff, I've seen this series before, but rewatching it again was just honestly just as thrilling as it was basically the first time around. And I think that like the whole 1910 aspect of this storytelling, how they basically bring this show to life, is absolutely amazing. It's great. It's so awesome. Honestly, I mean, like, just like right off the cuff, you feel like you're in it. There's no doubt or there's no doubt or hesitation as to you are in the 1910s and this is New Orleans. That you are basically here. You're in it. You're basically in it. Yeah, and I mean, like, honestly, that first scene, even with the whole, you know, it comes with the whole, even how they portray this with the whole prostitute and the madams, the prostitutes and the gentlemen that come to visit there. It's so, I can't even get the words for it. It's so authentic. Yeah, I guess I'm so historically, like, basically authentic for what the 1910s would just basically look like. Oh man, and again, like, I'm just like so surprised, like how it starts off with the whole prostitute and Louis comes in defending this lady about how he defending this lady about being, you know, taken up the ass by this English gentleman. Yeah, it's a great time all around. But that's not even the true beginning of this. The true beginning of this is it starts off with this reporter that you know he's gotten an invitation from Louis to come and do the interview, because apparently years before they had done this interview before. And I know, guys, I probably should have like watched the movie, and there's gonna be a bunch of people telling me like, "Oh my god, like you love this series, like watch the movie." But for any of you who haven't seen the series, it's awesome. Like I haven't seen the movie, but and watching the series and watching even the first episode, like, has kind of like sort of inspired me to move on and watch and think about actually watching the actual movie now, because it was just so great. It was just so great. Honestly, like just really, really that great. Something I want to talk about now. So basically what happens is that we meet Lestat in the future, and he's basically recollecting. The interview basically takes the what happens in it is the interview basically takes the perspective of from the perspective of Lestat, but he's recounting his histories and his past deeds basically within the 1910. And so far, like off the cuff, like I said, like right off the bat, episode 1 is just amazing. It's truly great. So in a short synopsis, what happens is we get to see the life and the going ons of Louis de Pont du Lac, living his normal life as, you know, a human. He's a human. He has a brother. He has a sister. He lives about his life of the way a normal human basically does, or basically would in the 1910s. And I think that, first of all, the vampire story, or the vampire aspect of it, is Interview with the Vampire. Vampire stories in general are very, very interesting. But I think that the thing that makes this thing shine so much is that, yes, everybody's done the whole perspective of like vampires from the perspective of Louisiana and Louisiana and like basically the South, like New Orleans and etc. We all seen True Blood. We all know about the whole True Blood thing. But what makes this again like so authentic is that, I mean, the roots and the deep ties right off the cuff to I think that that's interesting about with his family is that the ties and the roots to his spirituality in his religious upbringing, essentially. And like I think this kind of like it becomes so interesting to me, and becomes so, or it drives upon home where it kind of hits the I can kind of emotionally understand or connect with this character a little bit because of my upbringing and where I come from and where I grew up, like basically living in the Caribbean. We have a lot of influence, or we've been influenced heavily by the European nation that did push a lot of Christianity onto folks and did push a lot of believe this or I will basically murder you or murder all of you. And I think that has a very damaging psychosis on the nation of people, but it also intrinsically has a part and sort of a place within our culture as well, knowing and understanding that is a strong thing, the whole faith thing. And they show this theme of the whole faith thing and the faith versus debauchery thing so well. And I think that was the whole, and you go to Louisiana and during that time, I think that was the whole, basically the point of it was like to basically does show that juxtaposition of basically like we have individuals that are following in the way of Christ, following in the way of the Lord, and then other individuals that are just like that live in the life of debauchery. So that's essentially how they portray this so well, how they display this world, they bring the life, this world so well. So the first time when we meet Louis de Lac and we get a sense of how he is, the way that they present him is basically he's a pimp and he's pimping these girls out, and he's running, like I said before, he's running the house, so to speak, of these girls, these prostitutes, and just basically soliciting them. But the way how we meet his brother is that, again, that juxtaposition, that contrast of, we have Louis, who is the brother, and of course the show is called Interview with the Vampire. We have to show the darkness and the dark side of the nature of actual vampires. But the juxtaposition or the opposite of that, the contrast is that we have his brother that is a devout Christian, follower. Some people might call him Bible thumper, but devout Christian man who is very strict in his ways. And that contrast of somewhat conflict as well kind of sets the tone for the show, or this episode, I want to say, of like him fighting against this nature or fighting against this predator, as he says in the episode, of what he is and what he's going to basically be, and what he is and what he tends to fight with, the good versus the evil. So, and we meet his brother basically standing outside his place of business, his prostitutes, to preaching to his prostitutes, or one of them, basically trying to struggle to get him to say like, hey, like this is the right X, Y, and Z. It's the whole song and dance kind of thing until Louis comes in and he steps in. But we really meet him along with Lestat. It kind of shifts a little bit from the perspective of Louis into that of Lestat, and it's interesting because it shows and it lays down the groundwork of where we are right now, where we're going. And we see Louis pull a knife, or well, it looks like a fucking sword, honestly, if I'm being honest. It's long enough to be a sword, but like he pulls a knife on his brother from his cane. Again, very 1910s kind of like thing, you know what I mean? Like it's very, very sophisticated. And again, I like the perspective of him being, it's such interesting themes here that's basically going on. But this is the way that we basically we are introduced to Louis and him pulling a knife on his brother, and it sets a tone of maybe he's not such a great guy. He's not necessarily the hero of the story, but he is the center focus. He is the, for all intents and purposes, I guess, main character for sure. And in the later scene, we get to actually meet his family, and we get to actually get and understand the actual relationship, but of his between him and his brother. But because his brother was interfering with his place of business, place of employment, I'm wondering if that was basically that ferocity or that umphness or that like inspirational violence, knowing the inspirational violence that came from Louis that made Lestat to be drawn to him. And I'm also wondering that, like, did he know they were brothers? Because if he knew that they were brothers, and if that was actually more of attractive thing kind of towards him, he was like, oh, this man would like pull a knife on his own brother. Like, that's definitely a partner or someone who I can get behind. He's ruthless. He'd kill his own brother to make his own dreams basically come true. I think that's amazing, actually, because if he had really done his research and he'd been hunting Louis, he'd been watching him for some time, and he knew that, then that would actually, I guess, like maybe like that was a test to see like what kind of man he really is. And if he would be a suitable partner to walk in the way of darkness, so to speak. But yeah. So we go on to see Louis, this is New Orleans, debauchery. And New Orleans in the 1910s, debauchery is everywhere. And it's all about living life to its fullest, whoring, drinking, having fun, music. It's one big party. So, and I think the first time Louis and Lestat really meet one another is over the character, what's her name? Miss Lily. Yeah, Miss Lily. And Miss Lily, basically Miss Lily was Louis' favorite. And it looks, essentially, what it looked like was basically And Lestat was just basically showing that, okay, I'm a person of, all this wealth and strength and power. I could basically feel this girl. I mean, and don't get it wrong. Like, Miss Lily wasn't necessarily his girlfriend or anything, or his wife or whatever. Miss Lily is a prostitute through and through, but he, again, it's a show of strength that he wanted to say that, look at me. Look at me, I can do whatever I want because I have all this wealth, money, and power or whatever, and there's nothing that you can basically do to stop me. Even though, as Louis describes it, with everything in his being, he wanted to basically stop him. But he couldn't. And that was more or less because of, it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether he was stopped because he said he wanted to slit his throat in that moment. It was hard to say that whether he wanted to, whether he couldn't, or he was being compelled by his vampire powers to do something, to not to do something. I mean, I also could imagine that, from that perspective, he wasn't too privy to all of his vampire tricks, as he calls them. He didn't know that much, but Louis is he's an upper class person of color within that time, right? And I can only assume that even though, again, he says the line that he wanted to basically kill this man, he probably held back, and the reason that he just couldn't go out right there and do it was because and being a person of color myself, you gotta play to your strengths. You gotta know when to strike. You gotta know you probably couldn't just go ahead and cause a ruckus, right there and then, especially a place of such fancy establishment. So it's essentially, at the end of the day, Lestat, it's two things. Lestat basically leaves with the woman at the end of the day, so he wins the little jousting competition between them, offering up more money to spend time with Miss Lily. But it also leaves Lestat intrigued, and it leaves him wondering, I guess, who is this man? Who he to have that much influence and power. So like he described it was admiration along with, frustration, I guess, that drew him towards himself. But yeah. And something else I really, really liked, again, was the pacing of this episode was so good, because it's like you have the aspects of, again, the contrast of everything being all fancy and nice and everything being all sweet, and then you have another contrast of essentially the killings that is Lestat the vampire. It shows another contrast between, again, where we are with Louis being the vampire, Louis being the human, and who he's going to become, the vampire, like Lestat. And Lestat is, like I said, basically doing all the killing, basically doing all the killing. He's doing all the kind of the things a vampire does, and Louis still living his life as a human. So we see smidges of that, or kind of cuts of that within the episode, and that is actually pretty interesting. Something I thought that was actually also really cool was the card game that they had. That was actually really, really cool. Where he basically stops time, or what appears to be, he stops time from the perspective of what was happening with Louis, to have a honest conversation with him. And in vampire lore, sorry, just gonna take a sip there. But in vampire lore, in all of the vampire shows that I've seen, and I've seen a lot, guys. I've seen Buffy, I've seen Angel, I've seen a ton of vampire movies, things like Lost Boys and things like Lost Boys of vampires in the hood, all these like lores about vampires and vampirism. I've even seen like God forbid, but I've even seen Twilight. I'm not gonna get on. This isn't a Twilight podcast. This is about the vampire. But like, needless to say, the vampirism aspect of Hollywood and the way that they portray the different themes of being a vampire. Some of them are relatively straightforward, and some of them are relatively generic, I should say. Some of them are relatively generic, and some of them are unique to the aspects of some of them are unique to the aspects of the show. I've seen Vampire Diaries again. I've seen Vampire Diaries, Buffy, Angel, all these shows. There's certain things, there's certain elements of a vampire that are generic. Things like compulsion, things like super speed, super strength, being able to fly is a kind of things, and that's the thing that more recently I think might have become acceptable because of something called True Blood. I always thought that was kind of hacky and hokey. I think it's just because like another thing was them turning into like bats and stuff, like some Hollywood like kind of like real hokey kind of stuff, you know what I mean? But I think that this portrayal of vampirism and vampires, all this to say is this portrayal of vampirism and vampires and the way that they do special effects like compulsion or like these other things, these other tricks, or these other things that define him as a vampire are really different, and I like that. I really like that. They're really different, and I like that. And one of the things out of all those shows, I don't think I've ever seen, like I've seen vampires maybe walk into people's dreams and stuff. I think we've seen that on Moonlight. I think that was the show, yeah. Moonlight, which what it was called. But I've never seen people walk into other people's minds, like vampires walk into other people's minds, like while they're fully conscious, while they're awake, while they're fully conscious, and while much more or less they're doing something else. So that concept and that idea, it's actually pretty cool. It's actually pretty freaking cool. Like, because it's, again, even just like the idea of it, the perspective of it is just pretty cool. And the way how they shot it and the way how they show it and shot it, is that like the perspective is basically like everything slows down for that person. Everything around them is happening. It's weird. It's like a weird threading thing. It's like one thread is like we have like in the main background, we have like the voices or the audio basically talking, and just the little head shift that when Lestat is actually talking to the group, when he looks at Louis, like Louis can actually hear him in his head. And that, again, that idea is so cool. And when Louis looks around the room, he sees like everybody else is kind of like frozen in time. He looks at one guy, he's looking in one direction. The chips on the table are just they're ever so slightly positioned in a way to where they show that they're about to like bounce back down onto the table. Liquid falling from one of the glass cups into another cup is just basically frozen. And all the while, the only people able to move or communicate are Louis and Lestat. And that is, again, that concept, that idea, so cool. And of course, they use this to cheat. Yes, at cards. Because, like, again, why the hell not? You're already in it, right? But again, cool. But but something that I really want to touch on too is think of the perspective of that from a 1910s gentleman of New Orleans, black gentleman of New Orleans. You imagine that. Imagine you were someone from the 1910s and you were seeing all this shit happen, or you run into this guy and he can do all this tricks. He's able to talk inside of your head, slow down time. I mean, like, you're freaking the fuck out. You don't know what the fuck's happening. Like, you're freaking the fuck out. And I don't even care who you are. You are freaking the fuck out, or at least scared a little bit. But it's I guess that's kind of, it was a little weird because like Louis, you would think that Louis would be a little bit more freaked out than what he was at this, but I guess he was just kind of like, all right, well, like, he's from somewhere else. There's got to be a logical way. It's got to be a logical way how he's doing this, I suppose. There's got to be something that he's doing that's making this look like how it's looking, or not appearing how it's like, or it's like, it's kind of thing where he's like suspending disbelief, where it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna relate this back to Dragon Ball Z, but like Mr. Hercule Satan is like, I think he knows, he sees what's happening. You have people in Dragon Ball Z blowing up buildings and shooting beams, and like they have super strength, and like it's amazing, way outside the scope of what Hercule can do. But again, he suspends disbelief because he doesn't want to break from his reality of what's possible and not possible. He's basically in denial, and like I don't think that it's to that extreme, but there might be a little bit of this because he's known that he can do these things, and these things, nobody else can do these things. But he's a French white. Like his sister says, he's a French white. So the amount of things that he can do are essentially, I don't know. I don't even know what that really means, but are essentially what, they're limitless or something like that. But I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to basically touch on that because I think that was actually really, really cool. Inside of the entire series. So Lestat and him obviously they become friends after that. Okay, so you help me cheating cards. You gotta be my buddy now, right? I guess that's how that works. Yeah, and for a time they go on to be friends, and you gotta remember, guys, like this is still taking from the perspective of all this is taking the perspective of, or the point of view of Lestat's future self. So he's still telling this story of how he was I guess seduced. Yeah, seduced by this vampire, essentially. Sharing things with him, going to the opera, basically all of these things. But I truly feel that the way that they portrayed, like, again, that whole thing is actually pretty good. What's weird, I think, is something else I want to point out, I guess, real quick, is his brother, Lestat's brother. Lestat's brother is weird. But I'm actually, it's eerie. His presence when you first meet him, like I said earlier before, he's a man, Bible thumper, talking about God and whatnot or whatever it is. And then we meet him on another scene where they're having breakfast and they're talking about her sister getting married. And then there's this little thing between him and Lestat. There's a little spiff, I want to say. Now, something that was just weird was that, like, up until this moment, up until the fight between Lestat and his brother, I did not know he was crazy. I wasn't sure he was crazy. And then upon rewatching it, there wasn't really any hints. I don't think so, anyway. I don't think that there was any kind of hints that, like, he was crazy. And I'm wondering if they were always supposed to play it that way, or were they gonna switch it up? They switched it up because I guess because it kind of makes it a little bit, makes it a little bit more spicy. We see him and his brother go to church. They give it. He's a little bit picky about which priest he wants to do the confession with, or whatever it is. But up until then, everything was normal until they had this dinner. It was normal-ish. I guess we see little inklings of it when Louis and his sister start to talk about giving her basically a wedding gift of traveling the world, etc., etc. But like all the while they're having this conversation, we see his brother in the balcony, kind of like talking to himself, and kind of giving this kind of like kind of simple kind of monologue. And whilst he's doing this, I'm wondering like, who is he talking to? And I look to the side, it's like, oh, okay, he isn't talking to anyone. And I was like, okay, a little odd, a little weird. Like, when people do this sometimes, it's not so weird. But a thing that kind of sets me off, that set it off, that actually defined that he was actually mentally unstable, was the fact that he started having a conversation with Lestat, and he was kind of like, oh, the birds told me to ask you the question, are you one with God, or something like that? Do you have, I think the line was, wait, do you have, is Christ in your life, or something like that? And I know from the perspective in a general case, a lot of, religious people, I've met many of them coming from like the Caribbean and stuff, and like having that influence when growing up in a kind of family like that. I understand that some individuals can be a little bit of extremists, taking it a little bit too little, a little bit too far, as to where they actually harm themselves or they harm other people. That's a little bit far. But he didn't seem to exhibit any of that. Like I said, not really. But this until he asked, until he started asking these questions, are you one with Christ, for Lestat? And then he's like, I didn't mean to be rude. The birds told me. And I was like, hold up, what is this guy? I was like, yeah, he's probably not. He's probably not a little bit right in the head. Like, something's going on with this dude. It's just a little weird. And then when it seemed like Lestat started to try to but he started to somewhat like compel him. He started to somewhat compel him while they were in the middle of dinner, because he was asking him about his connection with God, and Lestat basically tells him stuff like, oh, he had a relationship, but his father disapproved, and they had a falling out, and they tried to remove his brother, started to try to remove him from the church or whatever it is. And this basically this entire story. But again, that was just like an inkling drop of him being crazy. And I'm wondering, like I said before, I'm really wondering, was he supposed to always be crazy? Was he supposed to always be crazy? And if they did, they cracked that in slightly they sprinkled that in slightly to basically make his eventual exit from the show, which we'll get to in a little bit, that more, not meaningful, but that more logical. Yeah, that more logical to basically what eventually happened to him. So what happens next is like, the scene with the threesome scene, and oh my god, man, this was some spicy stuff in this. Interview with the Vampire is definitely rated for a mature audience. Please, guys, if you're listening to this, make sure you're of age. Make sure you're of age. Yeah, it'd be good. It'd be good if you're of age. Yeah. Before you watch this, there's some sassy scenes in this. The threesome episode of basically what happens between Louis Lestat and Miss Lily, and essentially they go back to Lestat's place and they begin to engage, you know, in some sexual activity, and I mean, again, like nothing wrong with this. And I guess from the way that they were hanging out and the way that they were talking with one another and the way that they were being with one another, I'm not too surprised at the fact that what happens during the encounter of these three happens. Which essentially is Louis and Lestat engage with this woman, but then they begin to engage on themselves with one another in a homosexual kind of way, which is cool. But again, I sensed it, and I was like, I think we all sensed it as an audience, like it's coming, like it's totally coming or whatever it is. But something I noticed within this scene was that because it doesn't start off with Louis, like I said before, it doesn't start off with Louis and Lestat just making out like right away, and like they're getting it on. It starts off with all three of them, and it's a spicy scene where Miss Lily is engaging, you know, and Lestat's basically going down on her, and it looks like she comes. And when Lily comes, somehow, again, I've never seen this magical vampire power where you make a person come, you can make them just fall asleep like that. That shit would be dope if you had that though, right? Anyway. So that happens. She comes and she falls asleep, and Lestat is literally just like sleep, and she sleeps. And before that, something, a little tidbit is where Lestat kind of like caresses Louis a little bit while he's on Miss Lily, and he kind of like pushes him away. He denies him. He's like, no, I don't want to like do some like gay stuff, and only to Miss Lily sees this, and Miss Lily's like, no, it's okay. Like almost like giving him the permission to say, like, you know, it's okay for you to be with him. He said, that's fine. Like, that's fine. At first, when I first watched it, I thought like when she said, okay, that's fine. When he slaps Lestat away. He's like, that's fine. At first I meant that like, okay, it's fine that you don't want this. But now rewatching it and knowing that he actually is bisexual, homosexual, whatever it is, that he has feelings for another man, it's almost as though he was giving she was giving Louis permission to be to say like, no, that's fine, like that's fine, like it's okay to be with a man. And that's something I didn't notice until the rewatch. From watching the rewatch, there's like subtle subtext there. It's like, no, that's fine, kind of deal, or whatever it is. So she sleeps, and then they just basically start going at it. And he bares his fangs, and he bites him, and they begin to float. Another vampire thing, like I think relatively new, that they did this inside of True Blood. And I think that's the first time I ever saw/heard about vampires flying. And I mentioned this earlier. I think it's weird. I don't know if anybody disagrees with me. That's fine. But flying vampires are weird. I don't think vampires should be able to. It's weird. It's like, okay, like it's hokey. It's kind of hokey. It's kind of hokey to the fact that where it kind of, I think it draws back roots to the whole Hollywood aspect of Dracula and Nosferatu, of what a vampire basically should be. He's like, oh, he should be able to fly and turn on the bats and shit or whatever it is. Well, also shout out to Dracula, the Dracula series that I think that was on a BBC or some other show way back when. That one was actually really good too. I think there was some Hollywood tricks in there, like in terms of like turning into a wolf and stuff. But they really did it from an old school perspective of who Vladimir the Impaler would be, or is. But yeah, the whole flying thing is just very weird to me. I don't know. I don't think vampires should fly. It looks weird. It's hard to do. A vampire should be this. It shouldn't be. It should be an easy portrayal of what they are. They just shouldn't be able to fly. They're not superheroes. It's weird. Anyway, yeah. So the night ends, and they. I feel like when the night ends, I feel like we as an audience have gone through some kind of transformation as well as Louis, because as he describes it, when he is bitten or he accepts the little drink, or I forget what they call it in French, the petit de Luc or something like that. Something, I don't know. I'm not French, guys. Don't judge me too hard on that. I'm not French. But when they are, when he gets the little drink from, when Lestat takes the little drink from Louis, it gave him a certain kind of high. And that aspect of vampirism is actually kind of interesting, because that kind of relates back to the True Blood thing. Because I don't know if any of you out there who's seen True Blood was a show that when they got bit by the vampire themselves, instead of like, yeah, it feels like you're dying, but it also feels like you're on this ridiculous kind of fucking high that basically both, I want to say both the vampire and the human basically feels. I'm not too sure about that, the vampire, but definitely the human, I think, basically feels when they get bit. That aspect of it, that doesn't bother me too much. I think it's a different style, it's a different idea, and a different kind of writing mechanism of what the story and show could possibly be. But anyway, he describes it as like a higher than high, being higher than high. Like, you know what I mean? Like the most satisfying thing basically ever. And that night ends with him feeling that and knowing that he is now, before he was like, he had encounters with other men or whatever it is. And I feel like as the audience, our perspective is kind of like, oh, well, okay, like when he first went into the prostitution house, he looks for Miss Lily, and the way how he meets Miss Lestat is he's looking for Miss Lily, but Miss Lily is actually preoccupied with Lestat. Now, from an audience perspective, we are to assume his sexuality is basically that he is straight for the most part. And then as we get closer and closer to that threesome, or as they hang out more and more and more, we start to kind of wonder about, like, is this guy straight? Like, is he more fluid with his sexuality? And then I feel like after it's significant, because after he had that such tremendous experience with Lestat, and after he's had this tremendous experience with Lestat, and after he had this sexual, I guess, awakening with Lestat, he openly says that he's gay. And he openly says that by saying that he can't be, though. He says that by denying himself of his sexuality, and saying that you could be a lot of things in New Orleans, but an openly gay Negro man was not one of them. So he decides to never return. He's vowed to never return again to the home of Lestat. So he can never openly accept. And that theme of acceptance and accepting himself, it's also what makes his first episode so very interesting. So that theme of, like I said, that's what makes it so interesting. So that denial, because I think that when he says it there in that space of after he's experienced the greatest high he ever experienced, like he's accepted now. He's like, no, I'm a gay man now. Like I'm gay. Like that's it. That's the end of it. Like we've decided like I'm gay. I'm gonna mess around with girls every once in a while, but I'm, strictly gay. That's what he is determined for himself. But he denies that part of himself because he knows that he can't be that in Louisiana. Yeah. So something else that was kind of cool was the fact that the little number that they did with the tap dancing, that was pretty cool. I wonder how long it took for them to learn those as the actors, though. Man, I must have taken. I'm always amazed, like at any kind of dancing or any kind of musicianship. I always ask those questions, like, is the guy really playing that, or is they? I've been watching the show for too long. Is they ain't or is they on? It's they. No. I always have that question of like, how long did it take them to learn the choreography for the dances, or how long did it actually take them, or is it actually them that's actually getting hurt in those stunts or whatever? Do they do their own stunts or something like that? But for the most part, it looked like they were indeed dancing for this tap dancing kind of scene that they had for the ABCDEFGs. And I can't remember exactly what it stand for. That was him and his brother's little group, dancing for Christ or something like that. But yeah. Now something of note, after when they go to the top of the roof after the whole festivities are over for his wedding, for his sister's wedding. So his sister's married now, and they go to the top of the roof, and this is where the one of the scenes happens that I think that really resonates, and that makes the first episode, that makes the pilot for this so strong, is that you don't see this coming. It's odd. You don't see this coming at all. Louis is having a conversation with his brother atop this roof, and it looks like how comfortable they are climbing this thing and how comfortable they are standing on it. Usually when you're on a roof, or if you don't know the roof, or if the roof is like, and it's not like a flat roof, guys, it's like a pointed roof. If you're on a roof or something like that, you're usually, unless you're a roofer, but again, you would be used to being on roofs. It looks like they're very comfortable up there. It looks like they've been up there more than 100 times. And they're watching the sunrise after the long night of debauchery. And the sun's coming up, and Louis is having a conversation with his brother about Lestat, and how his brother doesn't basically trust Lestat, and telling him to be wary of Lestat and be, watch out for him, and don't be fooled by what he is, and you think he's the devil, and all this other stuff, and how he thinks he should get married. And then out of nowhere, almost seemingly out of nowhere, after he tells him that he loves him, after he tells his brother that he loves him, he kind of walks out of frame, and he walks towards, literally, it looks like towards, almost kind of like towards the sunset, and he walks right off the edge of the building, right at the edge of the house, and it's a big I think I want to say almost two to three, maybe 3-story house. It's a big house, like a mansion house, because these people are rich. And that was the last time Lestat ever saw a sunrise, according to him, in via the interview. And I just thought that was so significant. I'm saying significant because two things. Again, because I know the story and I know what happens in the future episodes when the questions that he asks Lestat. But I'm wondering again, was that planned? Was it supposed to go down that way? Was he supposed to be crazy? Was he not supposed to be crazy? Because we got little hints, twinklings of it. Was he supposed to survive for a longer time, a longer period of time than he did essentially on the show? Yeah. So at this point, so his brother's dead, and they have the funeral for his brother, and Lestat tries to console him, but Louis pushes him away, essentially. And his family, his mom, if anything, blames Louis for the death of his brother, and it leaves him basically a broken man, so broken that he feels like so alone in the entire world, and he needs some kind of comfort, but he can't find it from his family or his sister, and so he turns to God and he goes to the church, and he goes inside of the confessional and he starts confessing to the priest, who basically tells him that, hey, like, speak your sins, and he starts a beautiful performance by his name's Jacob, right? Yeah, by Jacob Anderson. Beautiful performance by Jacob Anderson. Honestly, he was the same guy from Game of Thrones. He played Khaleesi's halftime boyfriend or whatever. At least he had a love boyfriend. So he was one of the Sullys or whatever. But he had an excellent performance here about when he starts to confess all of his sins, and the priest is just basically essentially listening to him about all the horrible things that he's done. And as he's confessing, Lestat comes and he breaks into the confessional, and he starts to essentially drink the priest on the ground. Now, something that bothered me about this scene, I don't understand why it was necessary, is that there's a lot of damage that happens throughout the confessional. Yes, breaking the confessional is fine, but when he's drinking from him on the ground or whatever it is, and Lestat is going after him, why is there fire? Why is there a fire in the background? I don't understand that. Why is there a fire? I guess it's to make it look more dramatic that he's a vampire now, and he's a vampire, and he's tried to he's bringing, I guess, again, that symbolism of bringing the darkness to light. But how did that fucking thing get on fire? How did that fucking thing get on fire? That doesn't make any sense to me. Oh man. Anyway, so they begin to have a conversation about how Lestat thinks that he is basically, the summary of the conversation is basically that he's wasting his time as, being human, and he's not the devil. And if he wants more out of life, and he wants to be more out of life, that him basically essentially turns him into a vampire. And I thought doing this in the first episode was wow, actually I didn't think that they would do it. When I first watched it, I didn't think that they were going to be doing that in the first episode. That's actually because you watch Vampire Diaries, all this other shit, and if someone's being courted, and this is actually also a very interesting contrast of if someone's being courted to become a vampire, and love is involved in it, they usually take a while to turn this person to make sure that they're ready or whatever it is. No, Louis chooses this immediately. He's like, yes, because again, of how helpless and how alone in the world he felt. And basically when he started talking to him, I think one of the phrases is he had a way about him or something like that. He felt seen, and he gives him the bite. And the way how they do vampirism here was actually pretty good. And it's similar to, because not everybody does vampirism this way. Buffy didn't do it this way, but the Vampire Diaries and the originals kind of basically do it this way, where they exchange blood and then they become vampires rather than just fighting them. But anyway, this was interesting because it did show the transformation of him becoming a vampire. The rules for this were on point. This is actually really good. But yeah, and that's essentially with him becoming a vampire, and them in this church with this burning flame. I don't know how this thing got on fire, by the way, but with this burning flame, maybe one of the candles fell. Is how the episode essentially ends. Now, what I want to talk about real quick is top 3 scenes. My top 3 scenes for this series, essentially. Honestly, I think the first scene, was actually really well done and really, really set the tone for this, which was really, really good, was the fight between Lestat and Louis' brother. He looked so intrigued and so, again, like hypnotized, and we couldn't basically. I think it was compulsion that Lestat was using on, like, definitely some compulsion, some mind trick that he was using on his brother at the dinner table when he was when I had the dinner table and he was questioning him about God and stuff. And I think I like this scene one of the most, because this is where we start to actually see Lestat's questionable nature, even though he is a vampire. Like the fact that even though he's in love, he has some interest in Louis at this point, because we didn't know that he loved him or likes him or whatever it is. That he would attack one of his own, despite he would use these tricks on one of his own people. It also shows that he would do. It also shows that he has a problem. It does a few things. It shows that he has a problem with being asked about, Christianity and Christ and all that stuff and religion. He has a huge problem with it, obviously, because he's a vampire, but it gave us a little bit of insight as to his background, which I think will become a little bit more interesting later, because of what happens to the entire story. He starts to tell the story about, and something I didn't notice was he starts to tell the story about his father and his brothers or whatever it is, about how they pulled him away from being a priest. And that seems very earnest and true and right about a story in his life. Like, it was a very believable story that was happening within his life. The next scene, one of my other favorite scenes, I think, from this was the death of his brother. Like, that scene was like another top one, because you didn't see it coming, and he was just, like I said before, he was just talking to him. They were up there very relaxed. They didn't feel any fear of falling, anything like that. So this is a willing, conscious decision from his brother to walk off of that roof and kill himself. And that was, in itself, the way that it was done was again, you didn't see it coming. It was really, really good. Like, I mean, you thought about it, but it was subtle. It wasn't so just very direct as to, like, okay, yeah, he's totally gonna kill himself or whatever it is. But it also brings up my question of, like, a lot of questions of, like, because he asks us, I know he does ask us this later on in the series. He says that, did you do something with my brother? Did you kill my brother? Did you mess with my brother or whatever? And he's like, and then Lestat denies it. And Louis said, I had to ask. And it makes me question, like, I mean, I don't know, maybe he said no, but like Lestat's he's a little all over the place. But even if he didn't, again, I'm wondering, I still have questions. I'm just inklings of wonderings, was his brother really supposed to die there? Because him being crazy, we only see little inklings of it. And we only know, I guess that was easy to sell. I'm wondering if that was so easy to sell, like Christianity or religious people being crazy, because but sometimes they can definitely be extremists. And like my third and final favorite scene, I think, is I didn't really touch on it, was and that's when I knew what I was in. When they were in this church and he pulls the father out and he kills him. But the other priest that was there slips on the blood of the father that was already dead on the floor. And as the other priest tries to get away, Lestat is walking normally. So it's almost like he's walking in like super speed. And the guy is running in slow motion. He's running so slow. He's trying to get away. And Lestat's just walking. And with his mind tricks, he closed the gates. And he punches a hole right through his face. And the way that the cinematography of that, how they did that, looked so real. Looked so like this is how a vampire would. This is how strong a vampire is. Like ridiculous strength. Like yes, like this is exactly how it would. This is exactly how it would go. So those are my top favorite scenes. Definitely let me know if you agree with them, or for this episode of Interview with the Vampire Season 1, Episode 1, if you definitely agree with them. I will give the on review score.
On review, Interview with the Vampire, Episode 1 receives a 5 out of 5.
Definitely has every aspect and piece of drama of what it needs to be for a vampire show. This is a vampire show. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, make sure you follow us on all of our socials: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at OnReviewCast. That's OnReviewCast at Twitter, OnReviewCast, Facebook.com, OnReviewCast on Instagram as well. Lastly, guys, before I sign off, don't forget, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.